Not only can you use a one-shot to introduce players to a new role-playing game and teach them the core mechanics, you can also once in a while play a one-shot for special occasions like a Halloween horror game. Independent of why you are playing a one-shot, it always has a similar structure, and today we look at a one-shot similar to a starter set and a campaign introduction. The first thing that I want to talk about are the player characters. In your session 0 you can talk to your players and ask them if they want to have a session 0 so you can introduce the game to them. When you do so, you can ask your players which kind of character do they want to play. Then you look at the rules and at your world and then show them which kind of character this would be. When you don't do so, you can just make a pool of characters. 4 to 8 for 4 players would work fine, for instance, just so they have a pool they can choose from. And the characters should work wildly different so they understand what are the differences between the characters and what could they choose. You should keep the characters easy. For instance, when you have a leveling system like Dungeons & Dragons from 1 to 20, you should keep the characters at level 1. Let's shortly talk about the villain. Within a one-shot, the villain shouldn't be ambiguous. The players have too much stuff to figure out, especially when they are new players, and they can't think about, is this guy really evil? You still can make the villain three-dimensional, but it's not needed for a one-shot. You shouldn't make your work harder than it is already. Just take a guy that is evil, that has a moral that 100% conflicts with the moral of the characters. Now let's talk about the structure. In general, you should keep the plot relatively easy, not only so you can understand the plot and don't get caught up in the details, but also that your players can understand the plot. To keep the structure easy, I would make 4 to 5 encounters, of which 3 are combat encounters, 1 is a social encounter and 1 is an investigative encounter. I would plan them to be 30 to 45 minutes long, and if they are longer, I can leave out the middle combat encounter. I plan the middle combat encounter in a way that it doesn't affect the plot when it is left out. And I suggest making 3 combat encounters, that you have at least 2 combat encounters for especially heavy rule games that concentrate on combat like Dungeons & Dragons and Pathfinder. I take the first combat encounter to teach my players the rules, and for that I would even plan 1 hour to just give them the time to learn the rules and understand how the game works in general. The investigative encounter I use to show players how to stealth, sleight of hand or be silent in general, how to observe some NPCs, how to uncover mysteries, how to interact with the world in general and what happens after they have interacted with the world. In a social encounter, I show my players how they in general interact with NPCs, what happens when they say certain things, and how in general do NPCs interact with players. I teach them the roles that are connected to role-playing or social encounters like persuasion or deception. In general, I mix all of these encounters a little bit together, so you don't have a hard cut between a social encounter, a combat encounter, and an investigative encounter. The players can investigate certain things within a combat, they can have a social conversation with the enemy within combat, and so on. How do you now connect a one-shot to a campaign? First of all, I would have both happen at the same local place at the same time period. And then before I start the one-shot, I would have a monologue that talks about the general law of the world, but also of this local place, to give them an idea of what the society is like, what is the architecture in this region, what are the people like, what are the laws. This can help the players tremendously when they create their backstory, because they already know what the local place will be, where they are going to play through the campaign. Another thing you can do is tie the villain that they fight within the one-shot to the plot of your main story within the campaign. You could show the players how this villain has a lot of power, kills a lot of people, does a lot of bad stuff in the name of another entity that is within your plot. Now about teaching the rules. This is something that I also would do after the monologue, but before the one-shot starts. Even before you start the one-shot, your players need an idea of what the game is like, how does it work, what is an initiative, what is the combat like, what are actions, movement, and so on. They need to know how spells work, or in general how features work they have. You also should tell them how they interact with the world, that you describe a scene and then the players can take actions within those scenes, which then you further describe in detail. I would also give my players a handout that shows what are the most important rules for the game, the basics of the game, so to speak, and also the things about their character, what are their spells and their features. But I would also write down some abbreviations. For instance, when you play Dungeons & Dragons and you would just have set dex as a score, you want to have it described within the handout so the players understand what it actually does. But also for things that are written on the character sheet that have a different meaning within the real world should be described on that handout. So now I would like to give you an example on how such a one-shot could look like. First of all, you want your players to describe their characters, and you should have told them before the one-shot that they just take a few minutes to think about what the character looks like and who that person is. Immediately after the players have described themselves, you want to set the scene, you want to show them where they are, you want to describe exactly what they see, and then you want to start with the combat. You describe the combatants, maybe they are human, maybe they are creatures, maybe they act different than they actually should. After the combat they investigate the bodies or the location and they find some clues about a bigger narrative. Maybe some of those creatures were infected and now they have to figure out where this infection comes from or why are they affected. Maybe they have saved an NPC that they now can talk to that can give them some information that they don't have. And either through the investigation or through the interaction with the NPCs they now have a new location that they can go to. There could be another fight and after this fight another investigation, or they may save another NPC or the first NPC. And from this investigation or social encounter they gain new information that sets part of a larger plot. They now follow this plot and at the end of this plot they have the villain that they have to fight. That's everything that I've got for today. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've learned something. If you've liked what you've seen, please share, like and subscribe, and we see us in the next one.